The alien fleet hovered ominously over Earth, their warships a testament to technological superiority. They had encountered countless species, and every time, the result was the same: quick and decisive domination. The planet below, with its small blue patches of water and green landmasses, was nothing more than another conquest, another world to subjugate. Inside one of the command ships, Commander Velner stood tall, his sleek armor reflecting the sterile light of the ship's control room. His race, the Zalther, had prided themselves on their efficiency in warfare. Conquering Earth was supposed to be routine. After all, humans were an undeveloped species with primitive technology. Their existence had only recently registered on the galactic stage, and the Zalther saw them as nothing more than an afterthought. "They call themselves humans," one of his subordinates scoffed, examining the data on the holoscreen. "Their military capabilities are laughable compared to our smallest fleet." Velner gave a dismissive grunt. "Their civilization is barely out of its infancy. We've eradicated more advanced races without breaking a sweat. Humans won't even know what hit them." From the vantage point of their ship, they watched as Earth's military tried to respond to the arrival of the Zalther fleet. Jets scrambled in a disorganized frenzy, and ground forces moved into position. Velner couldn't help but feel a pang of boredom. This was beneath them. No one in the fleet expected a challenge. The Zalther's plasma cannons, energy shields, and battle-hardened soldiers were far beyond anything humans could even comprehend. "Send the vanguard," Velner ordered. "Let's get this over with." The first wave of Zalther troops descended onto Earth in a display of overwhelming force. The sky was alight with the glow of energy weapons as they cut through the human defenses with ease. The soldiers laughed in their native tongue, mocking the humans' futile attempts to resist. To them, this was a routine exercise, a mere warm-up for the larger invasion force that hovered in orbit, waiting for the all-clear to move in and occupy the planet. Humans scrambled in all directions, caught off guard by the sheer power and precision of the Zalther. Buildings crumbled, and infrastructure was decimated in seconds. Despite their desperate attempts to organize, human forces seemed chaotic and disjointed. It was everything the Zalther had expected: weak, uncoordinated, and ultimately doomed. A Zalther lieutenant approached Commander Velner, pride evident in his voice. "The humans are falling apart, as predicted. Their cities burn, and their soldiers flee. Soon Earth will be ours." Velner nodded, only half listening. It was too easy. Conquest was their way of life, but there was no honor in crushing an opponent who couldn't fight back. He had almost hoped for some challenge, some minor resistance, but this was disappointing. They had barely begun, and yet it felt as though the humans had already lost. But something shifted. The initial easy victory they had predicted seemed to stall. There were pockets of human soldiers who didn't run. Small groups that fought back in ways that defied logic. They weren't using the most advanced technology, but they moved with purpose, exploiting weaknesses the Zalther hadn't even considered. One such group caught Velner's attention. A platoon of human soldiers had managed to take out an entire Zalther squadron. They moved quickly, with precision and a level of coordination that didn't match their primitive resources. The commander narrowed his eyes, watching them on the display screen. "Who are they?" Velner asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "Just humans, sir," the lieutenant responded. "They must have gotten lucky." Velner didn't believe in luck. He watched as the human soldiers continued their advance, picking off Zalther troops with an intensity that was unsettling. They weren't retreating, even when outnumbered. They fought with a determination that was unexpected for a species supposedly on the brink of defeat. He turned to his lieutenant. "Send in reinforcements. I want that group eliminated." As more Zalther troops landed to bolster their numbers, the tide of the battle seemed set to turn back in the aliens' favor. Yet, the humans adapted. They fought back with a ferocity that defied all logic. Each time the Zalther believed they had the upper hand, the humans countered with surprising effectiveness. They weren't using advanced weaponry, but they were unpredictable, using guerrilla tactics that baffled the alien invaders. Velner's confidence began to waver, but he kept his face emotionless. These humans, there's something different about them. They don't break like the others. They are a nuisance, Commander, nothing more, the lieutenant insisted. But Velner wasn't so sure. Something gnawed at him as he continued to observe the humans. It wasn't just their tactics. It was their refusal to surrender, their unwavering commitment to fight to the last breath. The Zalthar had encountered many species, but this one didn't know when to give up. For the first time since the invasion began, Velner felt a flicker of concern. Could they have underestimated this species? He pushed the thought aside, but the humans were already planting the seeds of doubt in his mind. The Zalthar forces spread out, confident that the resistance they had encountered was a fluke, an anomaly among an otherwise disorganized species. Their advanced technology should have crushed any opposition long before it could form a coherent counterattack. Yet, something was wrong. The humans weren't behaving as expected. Instead of retreating or surrendering, they dug in their heels, regrouping and striking back with a ferocity that defied logic. As the battle unfolded, the Zalthar ground troops encountered small but coordinated human units in the outskirts of a destroyed city. The humans were using cover, making clever use of their surroundings to ambush alien patrols, taking down soldiers in hit-and-run attacks that left the Zalthar rattled. For a race that relied so heavily on their advanced tech, they were unused to this type of fighting. The battlefield was becoming chaotic, unpredictable, exactly the kind of environment where human ingenuity thrived. The Zalthar commander overseeing the ground assault, Captain Vornak, couldn't understand what was happening. The reports coming in from his squads didn't make sense. How could these humans, with their outdated firearms and lack of energy shields, be causing so much damage? Sir, Sector B-17 reports heavy casualties. A soldier barked, his voice tight with disbelief. They say the humans have captured 2 of our tanks and turned them against us. Vornak's eyes narrowed in disbelief. Impossible. Those tanks are encrypted with our tech. There's no way they could operate them. But the facts were there, undeniable. Somewhere, somehow, the humans had figured out a way to hack into the Zalthar technology and use it against them. This wasn't something any other species had been able to do in such a short amount of time. The Zalthar prided themselves on their technological superiority, and now these humans, these primitive beings, were using their own machines to destroy them. Frustration grew among the alien ranks. More and more skirmishes were ending with losses that should have been easily avoided. The Zalthar were accustomed to walking through enemy defenses like a knife through soft flesh. But here, on Earth, they were being cut down by soldiers who fought with everything they had, never once giving an inch. It didn't matter if they were outgunned or outnumbered. The humans fought as if every inch of ground was sacred, and they fought to win. At one point, a group of Zalthar soldiers stormed what they believed to be a human command center, only to be met with a series of explosions that ripped through their ranks. It was a trap, set with crude but effective explosives. In the aftermath, they found no trace of the humans responsible. They had disappeared into the shadows as quickly as they had struck. Back aboard the main command ship, Commander Velner watched these developments with growing irritation. The humans were refusing to behave as expected. He had been assured this planet would fall easily, yet the resistance was proving more tenacious than any of the Zalthar could have anticipated. It wasn't their technology, it wasn't even their strategy. It was their sheer will to survive, to fight, and to kill. It was something the Zalthar had not accounted for. This shouldn't be happening. Velner muttered more to himself than to the officers gathered around him. These creatures are supposed to be inferior. The frustration in the command room was palpable. The human forces were small, their weapons archaic by Zalthar standards, and yet they continued to press back, exploiting every weakness, taking every opportunity to strike where it hurt the most. They didn't care about losses, they only cared about fighting, about surviving. They're not fighting by any known military strategy, one of the Zalthar tacticians said, reviewing footage from the battlefield. It's as if they're improvising. Improvising? Velner scoffed. That's the best explanation you can come up with? But deep down, Velner knew that was exactly what was happening. The humans were unpredictable, and unpredictability was dangerous. The Zalthar, in all their campaigns, had always relied on outmatching their opponents with superior technology and overwhelming force. Their strategy was built on precision, efficiency, and crushing any opposition with sheer firepower. But these humans, they were fighting on instinct, making decisions in the heat of the moment, and adapting faster than any other species the Zalthar had faced. In one instance, a Zalthar scouting squad was ambushed by human snipers hiding in the ruins of a city. The humans had no cloaking technology, no advanced gear, yet they had somehow remained invisible until they struck. They moved like ghosts, slipping through the rubble and disappearing before the Zalthar could react. The reports from the ground were staggering. What should have been an easy invasion was turning into a drawn-out conflict that the Zalthar were ill-prepared for. Commander Velner clenched his fists. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The Zalthar had underestimated these humans, and now they were paying for it. "Send in more reinforcements," Velner ordered coldly. "I want this resistance crushed before it spreads." But even as more Zalthar troops descended onto the planet, it became clear that overwhelming force was not enough. The more soldiers they deployed, the more humans seemed to rise up against them. Civilians took up arms, soldiers fought with relentless tenacity, and the human counterattacks grew more organized with each passing hour. They had no fear, no hesitation, and no intention of backing down. Velner stared at the battle reports with growing disbelief. What kind of species could endure this kind of assault and still fight back with such ferocity? For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Maybe they had made a grave error in assuming humans would be an easy conquest. And as the battle raged on, one thing became clear: this was no longer just an invasion. It was becoming a war. And the humans, despite their so-called inferior status, were proving to be the most dangerous enemy the Zalthar had ever faced. The tide of battle had shifted in ways the Zalthar had never anticipated. What was once an assured victory was now turning into a grueling conflict, with no clear end in sight. The humans, far from retreating or folding under pressure, had begun launching counterattacks that took the Zalthar completely by surprise. It wasn't just random resistance anymore. The humans were fighting with a level of coordination and brutality that was previously unthinkable for such a primitive species. Down on the ground, Zalthar squads found themselves in the middle of what felt like a nightmare. Every time they regrouped, another ambush was waiting. The humans had adapted with astonishing speed, using guerrilla tactics that disoriented the technologically superior alien invaders. They struck hard and fast, then vanished before the Zalthar could properly retaliate. One alien squad found itself surrounded in a dense urban landscape, caught in a carefully planned trap. What should have been an easy patrol had turned into a deadly game of cat and mouse. The humans weren't fighting like soldiers anymore, they were fighting like predators. They didn't care about capturing the Zalthar or following any rules of engagement. This was a fight to the death, and the humans were playing for keeps. "Command, we're pinned down," one Zalthar soldier hissed into his comm unit, his voice barely concealing the panic. "These humans, they're relentless." The response from command was cold and dismissive, but even the officers knew something was different now. The Zalthar, with all their advanced technology and military discipline, were being outmaneuvered by a species they had grossly underestimated. The humans had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, but they didn't need them. What they lacked in technology, they more than made up for in sheer willpower and tactical creativity. Reports of entire Zalthar squads being wiped out by human forces started flooding in. It was almost unthinkable, but the evidence was undeniable. Human soldiers, who should have been outgunned and overwhelmed, were finding ways to neutralize the Zalthar's advantages. They were capturing alien weaponry and using it against them. They were setting traps, blowing up supply routes, and launching surprise attacks with an intensity that the Zalthar had never experienced. Commander Velner stood in the command center, staring at the holographic map of the battlefield. The red dots, indicating Zalthar forces, were being picked off one by one. More and more areas were being marked as contested, a sign that the humans were gaining ground, even if only by inches. "This can't be happening," Velner muttered, his frustration barely contained. We are the Zalther. We don't lose to them. But it was happening. The humans had adapted faster than any species the Zalther had ever encountered. They were learning how to fight the Zalther with every battle, with every encounter, growing more effective with each passing hour. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. What was even more alarming was the shift in human strategy. At first, they had focused on defending their cities and holding the line. But now, they were actively seeking out Zalther forces, hunting them down with terrifying precision. The humans weren't just defending their planet anymore, they were pushing the Zalther back. In one particularly vicious encounter, a squad of Zalther elite soldiers was ambushed in the ruins of an old industrial zone. The humans had somehow anticipated the squad's movements, setting up traps and blocking off every potential escape route. It was a massacre. The humans moved with frightening efficiency, picking off the Zalther one by one, never allowing them to regroup. Back on the command ship, the mood was grim. The arrogance that had once filled the Zalther ranks had faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The humans weren't behaving like any other species they had conquered. There was no surrender, no negotiation. Every time the Zalther expected them to retreat, they found themselves facing even more resistance. Commander Velner watched the latest footage from the front lines. A group of human soldiers had captured a Zalther supply depot and were systematically destroying it, taking everything they could use and burning the rest. It was a ruthless display of efficiency, and Velner couldn't shake the feeling that these humans were far more dangerous than they appeared. They fight like animals, one of the Zalther tacticians said, shaking his head in disbelief. No mercy, no hesitation. They don't even take prisoners. Velner said nothing. He didn't want to admit it, but the tactician was right. The humans were fighting as if their very existence depended on it, and in a way it did. They weren't bound by the same rules of engagement, or protocols that the Zalther adhered to. The humans didn't care about honor or tradition. They cared about survival, and that made them more dangerous than any enemy the Zalther had faced before. In another sector, a Zalther base was overrun by human forces in the dead of night. The humans had used the cover of darkness to infiltrate the base, disabling the Zalther's security systems and cutting off their communications. By the time the Zalther realized what was happening, it was too late. The humans had taken control, slaughtering the alien soldiers and using their own weapons to defend the base from any reinforcements. Word of the humans' victory spread quickly, both among the invaders and the defenders. The Zalther were no longer dealing with a disorganized, inferior species. They were facing an enemy that had learned how to fight them, and worse, how to win. Velner's frustration turned to anger. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was personal. The Zalther had never lost a war, and they weren't about to let humans be the first to break that streak. But deep down, Velner knew the situation was dire. The humans were relentless. They weren't just fighting for their planet, they were fighting for every breath, every moment of their survival. And that made them the most dangerous opponent the Zalther had ever faced. The Zalther forces were beginning to falter. For every new squad they sent in, more came back in body bags. The humans had turned their own planet into a fortress, and every street, every building, every inch of ground was being fiercely contested. For the first time since the invasion began, the Zalther commanders began to consider retreat. It was unthinkable, but the alternative, total annihilation, was becoming more and more likely with each passing hour. The Zalther forces were stretched thin, their once overwhelming presence now reduced to scattered units, desperately trying to hold their positions. What had started as a confident invasion had devolved into a struggle for survival. The humans had refused to be cowed, and now, the Zalther found themselves outmaneuvered and on the defensive. For every assault they launched, the humans retaliated twice as hard. The aliens were beginning to realize that they weren't just fighting an army, they were fighting an entire species that had nothing left to lose. In the heart of the battlefield, Commander Velner stood grim-faced, watching as more reports of defeat came in. Entire battalions were being decimated. Even their most elite soldiers, the ones who had never seen defeat, were being slaughtered by the relentless human forces. The realization that the Zalther might actually lose this war was beginning to sink in. "They're like a virus," one of the commanders muttered bitterly, staring at the tactical maps. "Every time we think we've wiped them out, they come back stronger. They won't stop." Velner's voice was cold, devoid of the confidence he once exuded. "They're not like the others. They've adapted. And now, they're hunting us." The Zalther, a race built on superiority, had never encountered an enemy like this. They had crushed every species they had come across with their advanced technology and discipline. But these humans, these unpredictable, tenacious creatures, were turning the Zalther's own tactics against them. Every step forward the aliens took was met with ferocious resistance, and every retreat was pursued by a relentless counterattack. The humans had proven that they could not only withstand the initial shock of the invasion but also learn from it. They had studied the Zalther's weaknesses and exploited them ruthlessly. Their guerrilla tactics had evolved into coordinated assaults, striking at critical points in the Zalther's supply lines and communication networks. The aliens were being outsmarted, and it was driving them to the brink of collapse. Down on the ground, the final confrontation was reaching its peak. Human forces had pushed deep into Zalther-controlled territory, launching one of their most aggressive offensives yet. The alien stronghold, once thought impenetrable, was now under siege. Explosions rocked the compound as human forces advanced, their determination palpable. This wasn't just a battle for land or resources. This was a battle for survival, and the humans were proving that they would do whatever it took to win. Inside the stronghold, alien soldiers scrambled to maintain their defenses, but the humans were relentless. They had no fear, no hesitation. Every human that fell seemed to fuel the fire of those still standing. The Zalther, once the hunters, were now the prey. "Commander, we need to fall back," one of Velner's officers shouted over the chaos, his voice filled with desperation. "We can't hold them off." Velner's mind raced. Every instinct told him to retreat, to cut their losses and abandon this doomed invasion. But something inside him resisted. The Zalther didn't retreat. They had never retreated. To do so now would be an admission of failure, of defeat at the hands of a species they had once considered insignificant. But even as he clung to his pride, the reality of the situation was undeniable. The humans were winning. They had taken control of the battlefield, and now, they were closing in on the final Zalther stronghold. Outside, human forces pressed their advantage, pushing through the last of the Zalther defenses with a terrifying efficiency. Their weapons, once inferior, had been upgraded with alien technology. Their tactics, once scattered, were now precise and deadly. The humans had become masters of the battlefield, and the Zalther were running out of options. Velner's officers looked to him for orders, but he had none to give. The Zalther had underestimated the humans at every turn, and now they were paying the price. The aliens, who had once prided themselves on their superiority, were now being dismantled piece by a species they had barely considered a threat. The stronghold's walls shook as another explosion ripped through the outer defenses. Human forces were inside the perimeter now, fighting their way toward the command center. The Zalther soldiers who remained fought bravely, but it was clear they were no match for the human onslaught. As Velner stood there, watching the inevitable unfold, a bitter realization dawned on him. This wasn't just a battle for Earth. This was a battle for the survival of the Zalther as a dominant force in the galaxy. And they were losing. The humans had shown them something they had never encountered before, a species that didn't know when to quit, that didn't care about the odds, that fought not for victory, but for existence. And in the face of that kind of determination, the Zalther's technological superiority meant nothing. "They take no prisoners," Velner muttered, his voice hollow. "They fight to the end." His words hung in the air, a final admission of the truth the Zalther had been avoiding since the start of the invasion. The humans weren't going to stop. They weren't going to negotiate. They weren't going to surrender. They were going to win, because they had to. And that made them the most dangerous enemy the Zalther had ever faced. The sounds of battle grew closer, the gunfire and explosions now just outside the command center. Velner knew it was over. There would be no last-minute reinforcements, no technological miracle to save them. The humans had won, and there was nothing the Zalther could do to stop it. In his final moments, Velner couldn't help but admire the humans, even as they closed in for the kill. They had proven themselves in ways the Zalther had never imagined. They had turned what should have been a swift and easy conquest into the most devastating defeat in Zalther history. The doors to the command center burst open, and human soldiers stormed in, weapons drawn, eyes filled with the determination that had brought them to this moment. There was no hesitation, no mercy. The humans weren't here to negotiate, they were here to finish the fight. Velner stood tall, knowing his fate was sealed. He had led his people into a war they couldn't win, against an enemy they hadn't understood. And now, the humans were about to claim their victory. The last thing he saw before the world went dark was the cold, unwavering stare of the human soldier in front of him, a look that told him everything he needed to know about why the humans had won. They had fought like their lives depended on it. Because they did.